Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome. My name is Gashi, and I will be reading the land acknowledgement for today. So, welcome to No Hate in the Hammer's fourth conversation. Today, we're talking about restorative practice, and this is a part of a greater series together, building solidarity in Hamilton. So today we're going to be talking about restorative practice and kind of contextualizing it within like hate, discrimination, and building solidarity. So while we talk about these things, we must be firm in our acknowledgement that hate in Canada is not new, and that the foundations of this place that we call home is grounded in hate and in ongoing. It's important to recognize the violence that came with colonization and theft of indigenous lands that formed the foundations of this country. It is important, therefore, that we name the original, the past, the present, and the forever custodians of this land. I'm calling in from the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people, which is governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Ce territoire est couvert par la Convention du plat avec une cuillère et de la ceinture wampum. Ce dernier est un accord entre les Haudenosaunee et les Anishinaabe dans le but de partager les ressources autour des Grands Lacs. This is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share the resources around the Great Lake. This covenant asks that we take care and tend to the land. It states that the territory is a dish that we eat out of, but with one spoon, taking what we need and ensuring that there is some left for others. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. In this very moment, land defenders and Indigenous people across what we now call Canada are being arrested and threatened for following their constitutionally granted land rights. So this is the time where we can offer up solidarity in action, and this is the time where we can work towards a more just and free world. In my reflections on the Dish with One Spoon, to me it means that we tend to the land, that we take care of it, that we take what we need out of one spoon. So today's event is called Together, which makes me think of the fact that our struggles are also connected on this land and that we share our distinct yet similar experiences through this single spoon. Our liberations will always be connected, and the fight against hate is everyone's fight. So may we build movements, may we learn, grow, and combat hate, and may we do so together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gashi, for helping us bring a good ear and a good mind to this conversation today. The acknowledgement of the land is very important for any public gathering, but too often it has become performative. A call for equity and inclusion must be more than simply a statement we make. The challenge is to hold ourselves accountable for our commitments and to move from allyship to solidarity. My name is Muna Bele, and it is my pleasure to be your host for the fourth session in our speaker series, Together, Building Solidarity in Hamilton. Bienvenue tout le monde. Premièrement, je tiens à souligner l'importance de débuter ce rassemblement public en reconnaissant la terre, les ancêtres de cette génération qui ont protégé cette terre, l'impact de l'histoire coloniale et l'urgence des efforts de réconciliation. Ceci est particulièrement important alors que nous nous réunissons pour discuter de la discrimination et de la haine dans notre communauté. Je m'appelle Mouna Bilé et je suis heureuse d'être votre animatrice lors de cette quatrième partie de la série de conférenciers que nous appelons Ensemble, bâtir la solidarité à Hamilton. Aussi, j'aimerais vous rappeler que nous espérons offrir une session en français lors de notre conférence du printemps, le 19 et 20 mai. Nous vous encourageons à communiquer avec nous concernant des sujets qui vous intéressent. We ask you to engage with us over the next 75 minutes as we discuss tools to address conflict and respond to hate as a community using restorative practice. Our colleagues from the John Howard Society of Hamilton, Burlington, and area are here to share their extensive knowledge of restorative practice. Please welcome Ruth, Garth, and Jim.
So thank you for having us. And we would like to begin by saying that dealing with hate in this city is a communal task. And we believe strongly that we are much stronger together as we work through all of the issues surrounding this community and the greater country that we're living in. And one of the things that I would like to is explaining how I got involved in this work and why this work is so important. So as the executive director of the John Howard Society, I feel that I have an obligation as an organization that deals with Indigenous people more than any other grouping who is going to be incarcerated. This means all of the institutions are failing the groups that we deal with. That includes the school system, where there is also the highest rate of suspension and expulsion. It includes the criminal justice system, the youth justice system. And it is time that we begin to look at what is going on with these people. What are the barriers? And what is it that we're missing and dropping the ball on so that there are so many of these people that we are working with that are us, that are being discriminated against? So that I wanted to share. And we all approach this work professionally as well as personally. And people have said, is there really racism that exists in Hamilton? My answer is, where is there not racism that exists in Hamilton? And if you don't see it and acknowledge it, then that means you have privilege and have never had to look at it. I own my white privilege, and I hope to use that privilege to help people understand what that privilege is, what it has done, and how that needs to change. Garth, to you.
Saigo, so my name's Garth Bell and identify as a Black Indigenous person. My family has been in Hamilton since the 1800s. My family has faced racism since the 1800s, my Indigenous folks and my Black folks. This is why I do this work. I've been doing this restorative practice, working with all people, not just people of color and not just Indigenous people, to help people heal and to stop this vicious pipeline to prison that's been happening to my people for generations, and also to stop the lateral violence that goes on in our communities. We work in silos, and we need to work together, and we need allyship. We need to teach, we need to learn, we need to listen. And you'll find out when you do a restorative circle, you don't really have an option. You have a space, it's a safe space, and everybody's asked the same question. It's no longer the loudest is heard, it's no longer the person with privilege is heard. Everybody has an opportunity to share, to learn, and to listen. We have a long journey ahead of us. A lot of people are saying, oh, it's gotten better. No, it hasn't. It's just being talked about now. And you know, we do have a lot of reported hate crimes in Hamilton, and that's not always a negative thing. I mean, it's negative that it happens, but the education people are now reporting it. So miigwech, and I'll pass it over to Jim.
Scano. My name is Jim Dockstader. I'm Wolf Clan, Cayuga Nation, Haudenosaunee, Six Nations. And I've been involved in this restorative practices now for about 3.5, 4 years. And, you know, I prior to that, I'll say my life wasn't restorative. My life wasn't one that, you know, I'm looking to live right now. But you know, as an Indigenous person, you know, I look at my own life, my own family's life. I'm the first person in probably 4 or 5 generations not to be in residential school. Now, Brantford Residential School closed 2 years before I was born. And had I been born earlier or been open later, I have no doubt that I would have been there and it would have changed my life more drastically than what it already was. And you know, in my own healing path, you know, I'm trying to get into a place where I'm this functioning member of society that I'm helping. And you know, I have to kind of bring in things from my own culture to help with that. One of them is the two-row. The two-row agreement that, you know, for us as Indigenous people, we have with settlers. And it's quite simple in a lot of ways. And it's one that says, there's 2 canoes and I will be in my canoe. You're welcome to be in my canoe, but don't disrupt it. And I hope I'm welcome in your canoe. And I promise not to disrupt your canoe as well. And we can function like that carrying forward. I promote that life. I live that life. You know, I help people get into that life and also help people get a good mind. That's our goal, to get people into that good mind. And that's one of free of anger, free of jealousy, kind of any negative feelings that you have that we're looking to free you from, and to recognize that those negative feelings are all from childhood wounds, colonization. Every single person on this screen, every single person listening to this has been colonized, and there's effects that come with that. You know, money is a remedy sometimes, but money can't always keep you away from the effects of colonization. How would it be onto you? So, you know, we look to have a good mind and to live that two-row, and that's what we're promoting here, is that restorative practices. Yeah. Well, I can't hear.
Yep. Sorry, we're going to do a short PowerPoint and just have some discussion with you today on what restorative practice is, what it looks like. But we're going to start off with an activity. I'm just going to pull it up on the screen.
And Garth, I think Terry joined us as well. So yeah, welcome, Terry.
Terry, are you with us? And if you are, can you introduce yourself?
Oh, well.
Sorry, give me a minute. I'm just. I apologize. I'm just trying to find the. I'm struggling over here. I can't find the. We had it up.
So as he is looking, I will also explain that this is something that before the pandemic, we would do this kind of presentation and workshop in person. And since the pandemic, we are now doing them online. So it's still a fairly new venture for us, but this is something we offer to people who are interested in learning more in Hamilton or any other city that you may live in, especially now that it's virtual.
Oh, gee. Sorry, I'm not able to open it. We're gonna have to walk our way through it.
Do you want to make me co-host for a second? I can.
I'm looking for the community, non-community activity.
I have it.
Can you do that real quick, Jim? I apologize.
It's okay. You just have to open it up for me. You have to give me co-host.
Can somebody make Jim the co-host, please?
Yes, I think it should be working now.
Okay.
So while Jim does that, I want you to think of a time in your life when you've been bullied. I want you to think a time in your life when you've been ostracized. And I'm going to ask the question, and for those who aren't on the panel and those who are watching, I want you to think in one word how that made you feel. How are we doing there, Jim?
2 seconds. I'm the most prolific one, and they're just giving me an example at technology. Here we go. Can you see that?
Yep.
Oh. Oh, for Christ. Okay.
Let's just leave it, Jim.
Okay.
And maybe we can add to it, Jim, at the bottom.
Can do.
I'm going to ask some of the people on the panel on when you were bullied, when you were ostracized, how'd that make you feel?
I think you have a lot of those feelings already acknowledged in the list, but angry, I would say, hurt.
Ruth, how'd that make you feel when you were bullied?
Invisible and terrified.
What about you, Hugh?
I would say humiliated.
Someone indicated empty, not enough. We have also invincible, isolated, scared, embarrassed.
Jim, growing up, when you're bullied, how'd that make you feel?
When I was growing up, I get bullied, and I was one of the only dark kids, Indigenous kids that grew up in a small town. And, I grew up in a place where teachers, students, principals, adults, just in the street, they could just say whatever they want to me. And, after a while, you really start feeling dehumanized,
For myself, growing up in our city, I went to high school in Hamilton. So did my brother. We went to the same high school. I felt normal. I was bullied every day. It's called a nigger every day. Every single day that I went to school. Do you think I could share with them that I was Indigenous? Absolutely not. Terry, welcome.
Yes.
And I'll
My apologies, everybody, for being late. I was having internet issues. However, we've got them solved now.
So Terry, a time when you've been bullied, how'd that make you feel?
Scared, alone, insignificant.
We're gonna ask you another question now. I want you to think of a time when you've been welcomed, you're invited, you're a part of, you had a child, you got a promotion. In one word, how would that make you feel?
Confident.
What about you, Muna?
I would say included, respected, heard.
What about you, Hugh?
I think I share many of the emotions that are on the list, but probably belonging resonates the most.
Mm.
One of the panelists is saying worthy.
Accepted, included, motivated, we're even getting.
Yep.
I would add invincible, that I could do anything.
Jim, growing up, when you were invited, how did you feel?
I'd say humanized. Humanized.
Myself, growing up, I was afraid when I was invited. I was scared. When they harm me all the time, why are they inviting me? Why am I all of a sudden being included? And just think of our communities in Hamilton on how people feel. Now we're going to go back over to the other side again. So when people feel that way, how are they going to behave? What are we going to see? Ruth, at John Howard, people that feel that way when they're in court, and I see Donna's on there, what do we see?
Violent, substance abuse, anger outbursts. And I know for me personally, I grew up in a small town. I was Jewish. I am Jewish. There were very few Jewish people there. And we were learning about the Merchant of Venice. And every day I had to endure comments and horrible comments and stereotypes about Jews. And I threw a desk at this one young man because the teacher wouldn't make it stop. And I think we see that in court. Women especially pushed to the brink will use objects and will be violent. And that just creates further charges.
And similar story from me, Ruth. I'm in high school and we have to read To Kill a Mockingbird out loud. And I have to read the word nigger. That just opened up for everybody to say it, laugh at me. So I fought. I wanted them to kick me out of school. I didn't want to be there. What about you, Jim? What do you see?
What I see, or what I've experienced, is the violence or the aggression. You know, you start bugging somebody to the point where they can't make sense of it. You know, like what's happened to Ruth, or what you described, or even myself and Terry's talked about the same thing. You don't give anywhere; they have nowhere to go, and if there's no support around, the next step is violence, because it gets down to a really personal level of safety, right? You know, and to the recognition that you're looking around and no one else cares about your safety like that. I can't imagine the difference it would have made if my school said, you know, we're going to create a restorative environment for everybody. I probably could have had 25, 30 circles with teachers and principals and everybody to sort that out. So it's the violence that I see that it really gets down to. And I also do the program for John Howard Society for the criminal diversion for intimate partner violence. And just like what Ruth was saying, like we see an increase in men and women. A lot of them are non-violent. You know that by getting to talk to them, getting to know them. But what's happened is it's reached a limit. It's reached a place, and they have nowhere else to do. They don't know what to do, and they end up throwing something. Usually, you know, a cell phone is good enough. Throw an object to get you assault with a weapon, right? Verbalizing, telling somebody I'm going to kill you or I hate, like, you know, very strong language will get you a criminal charge. People don't know that, right? You know, we're talking about this left hand of this chart here, which is the non-community side. Majority of these things might get you a criminal charge, and people don't they don't realize they're in it because it's them. This is their own personal thing they do, and they've always experienced it. So all of a sudden, somebody stepping in and saying, listen, there's another way to solve these issues, sounds like foreign, sounds like a foreign language to them. So, you know, the anger is a really big issue, and especially in the city here.
And Mona, what do you see in the legal clinic when people feel that way? What behaviors?
Well, I think it certainly doesn't foster a relationship based on trust, and that's what we really need for us at the clinic to provide legal support. It's difficult to support someone if they won't walk through the door or don't trust you. But just to even add to the conversation in terms of the ways people behave as well, we have some comments, and someone said, sometimes people will behave in ways that they appear to be or become what others believe of them. And I can understand that statement very much, given the clients that we serve sometimes, and even sometimes with the youth that we work with. You know, when you constantly are meeting them with dehumanizing statements, behaviors, then they will show you, you know, the stereotype that you think they fit into. They will show you that stereotype, because that's a form of mechanism to address the harm and the pain that they're experiencing, right? So the response can go between complete disinterest in being involved or engaged to hostility and aggression. So there's a few more messages. Folks are also saying self-fulfilling prophecy, acting in a way you believe about yourself. So if you are always told you are worthless, etc., then yes, you will show them that stereotype. So I think we're certainly agreeing to that.
And if you look at these young people that are killing themselves and being killed in our city, we've worked with some of them. And they told me a long time ago, they've felt that way since grade 3. Since grade 3, they felt that way. And this is just a reminder too of systemic racism. This is the result of it. This is the result of feeling non-community. So let's go back to what I call the happy side, which we call community. When people feel happy, they feel safe, they feel accepted. How are they going to behave now? And I know we have a bunch, but what do you guys think? Ruth, what do you see when people feel community in the work we do?
Oh, they're going to get involved. They're going to work together. They're going to be empowered. They're going to be able to accomplish anything. And one of the things we have come up with in the agency is a diversity, equity, inclusivity committee. And when people feel included because they feel they belong, it's amazing. They just get so excited and so willing to share. And as you said at the beginning, they're willing to teach others about who they are as well.
Jim, you and I and Terry and Ruth have done many circles. We go into a lot of schools and do these circles. What's it like when the kids feel community? What do you see?
The best way I probably could describe it would be an unlocking. You know, you have kids, or I've seen, basically sitting there just being quiet, hoping, praying that nobody comes around them. They don't, you know, get involved. Like, they just don't want to be in the center of anything because trouble comes, right? And when you come in, I'll say you shuffle the deck back and you kind of create a new order. And the new order being is that there isn't one person or two people on top. There's nobody on the bottom. That we're creating equity here, right? The fact that we're stating out loud that I have to treat you, Garth, with respect, and you, Garth, have to treat Ruth with respect, and Ruth has to treat Mona with respect, and we all, you know, this is the whole thing we're trying to set up. And when people see safety in that for themselves, we see a different child altogether. Altogether, we see a different child, one that's confident, but not confident in the way where she's going to have to fight, but just confident in a way of just being there. And we know with schools, a better part of the problem is kids' anxiety. So when we have violence at the center of it, we're never going to get their attention until we dissolve that and make it safe.
So Jim, can you go up to the top? So this is what we describe, and this is what we talk about: community versus non-community. And I think everybody here has felt non-community at some point in their life. And when you have all these awful things going on with hate in our city, we have to remind that hate's coming from somewhere. Those people don't feel community. Not justifying their actions, not justifying their hurt, but we all need to heal. So can I get you to close that for a sec, Jim? So individuals with a strong sense of community are more likely to be motivated to act pro-socially. They're going to be aware of their surroundings. They're not going to just yell out, F this, F that. To develop social emotional competencies to avoid several problem behaviors, including drug use and violence. And we see violence. I mean, you look at some of the rallies, that's violence. Look at the United States right now with the Black Lives Matter, the violence. Less time off work. Ruth, you've been working with me now, what, 4 years?
Yep.
When was the last time I called in sick?
I don't think you have.
I haven't in 4 years, 5 years.
No.
Because I have that sense of community with the people that I work with. To avoid lateral violence. And let's talk about lateral violence for a moment. Because it's happening. It's happening all over our city. And I go back to us working in our silos. According to some people, because I'm a Black Indigenous man, I call myself a Black Indian. I'm not Black enough. I'm not Indigenous enough. Well, let me tell you something. My family is one of the first Black families in Hamilton, Ontario. And I learned a good lesson from a good friend, Lyndon George. If we're going to be working together, we need to consult with our knowledge keepers. I've been told that I'm not Black enough. Yet my uncle Link, he's Black enough. Ray Lewis, my cousin, he's Black enough. Pinky Lewis, he was Black enough. Got to stop harming each other. Because we are harming each other. And again, my family knows more about racism in Hamilton from a Black Indigenous perspective than anybody. We need to be more inclusive. We have lateral violence in our workplaces. The biggest thing for me when people have a strong sense of community, they smile. I don't know a time when our team is together that we don't smile. We don't laugh. We enjoy each other, but we also are able to respect our differences. One of the things I do in training is I challenge people to rethink. And we've been talking a lot about working with youth. We work a lot with adults. I'd rather work with youth because they have less to unlearn. We all have to start working together. I challenge people all the time. Should people be entitled to their beliefs? I'm going to tell you no. Not if their beliefs are harming other people. They shouldn't be entitled to that. So I'm going to talk a little bit real quick about the difference between our system, which is punitive. Our schools are punitive, our workplaces are punitive, our police are punitive. Where did that come from, being punitive? Colonization, slavery. Jim, 500 years ago, where we stand right now, was it punitive here?
There was no punitive system. And I mean, when I talked about the two-row agreement, that was the agreement. That was how we conducted. If you were new into the area and we were concerned about what you were doing, it was simply just to get on that two-row. And the biggest part of it was to just, it wasn't to police, it wasn't to kind of oversee. It was a genuineness that I want to see you succeed, so I'm going to help you. And based on these premises of your canoe and my canoe, so that the two don't get mixed up, right? No, we had our own ways and still have our own ways over here, but respecting that other people have their own ways over here. Again, not being punitive, but genuinely trying to help, right? So there was no punitive system. We wouldn't have been not punitive on people. We would have looked to restore their good mind, to bring them to that good place again, so that they can join us in what we're doing.
So in the punitive world that we do live in, when there's harm, a rule is broken. Therefore, what? There has to be a consequence. That's it. Bottom line. I hurt Jim, therefore I must be consequenced. On a restorative lens, there's harm. People are hurt. Relationships are damaged. I hurt Jim. I hurt that relationship with Jim. Response. Blame, punishment, pain. And the worst for me is we shame people. We shame them. I'll show my age for those that back in school when you misbehaved. They put you in the hallway in a chair. That was to shame you. That was so that every single person in that building knew that you were bad, that you misbehaved. Well, I had my own desk out there. And you know what? I was much happier there. I didn't have to put up with people's bullshit. On a restorative lens, response, needs created by harm to make things right. How do I fix what I did to Jim? How do I repair that? If you consequence me, going back up to a rule was broken and you consequence me, am I going to want to repair it? No, because now you got me. Justice seeks to prove right and wrong, achieved through guilt and punishment. And again, shame. Look at our courts on how we talk to people who have harmed people. We don't speak to them respectfully. The judge doesn't speak to them respectfully. That's our punitive system. Justice is thought through understanding, talk, reparation, achieved through responsibility, needs being met, healing of that. How do I fix what I did? Not only how do I fix it, how do I do that? We have to have those conversations. But in order to do that, I need to know how I impacted Jim. I can't just make an assumption on how I impact, not only how I impacted Jim, how I impacted Ruth, how I impacted my community. Punitive lens, limited acceptance back into family, school, community. No supports. And if you look at our system, courts and school. Kid misbehaves in school, he gets sent to the office. All he wants to know is how many days I'm getting. Somebody commits a crime. All they want to know, am I getting off? And if not, how many days am I doing? So if I plead, will I get less time? So in a restorative lens, there's a chance for full acceptance back into that community. Punishment rarely has a desired effect. It most often, it creates a whole new set of problems. Now, there is a time when we have to be punitive. When you're looking at a Paul Bernardo, he needs a punitive consequence. But for what we're talking about, what's going on in the city, we make assumptions that people know the difference between right and wrong. Well, I'll be the first to tell you they don't, because we make assumptions. Somebody who is racist, that apple didn't fall too far off the tree. And if everybody you know in your family is racist, how would you know any better? Because our curriculum doesn't say that. Our curriculum doesn't talk about it. I'm going to pass it over to Jim for a minute, and he's going to talk about healing.
So one of the, when we're doing this work, one of the biggest things that people will ask is kind of like, well, what now, right? Like, what do we do now? And this normal functioning, we find people in that state in all sorts of different ways. I do family mediation and child protection mediation, as well as this restorative work. And I've worked in schools, and we've done workplace disputes. It doesn't surprise me anymore when we find people that are in a really dysfunctioning place. And ultimately what happens there is that they usually use aggression or anger or some kind of management force to get what they want out of people and do what they want. And it leads to a complaint of some sort. And that's where we find folks, and we unpack about what's happened in their life. And I want to hear about it. When I'm talking to them, or Garth or Ruth, it isn't just the incident we want to hear, but I want to hear about, how did you get there? How did all that go? And we've heard, horrific stories of people growing up in just hate, people growing up in ignorance. I was taught that. That's what my dad told me. That's what my grandpa told me. And you see where, you don't know how they're functioning anymore, and they're barely functioning because they haven't, their skills have run out. And, in this day and age, when you see people say, it's too much political correctness, or, free speech, you can't say what you want. I believe in behind all that is from what we've learned when we were younger. If somebody taught you to talk to women and be misogynistic, and if someone taught you to talk to people of color and be racist, today's climate will in fact feel quite constraining. Feel like, wow, this whole world is against me. Well, this is where we bring you to attention. And so we've done this many, many times about how wrong you have grown up, how you've learned something that simply is not true. And it's hard for people to hide behind it, because I know as a practitioner, all I have to do is talk to you about whatever it is that you're having problems with, and it won't take me long, and you too, to realize that you don't know what you're talking about, that you don't know about how to talk to a person of color. You don't know how to talk to somebody that's LGBTQ because of the hate and the anger that you've got built up. So bringing people to a new place, right? Our goal is to return to a meaningful life, you see on the other side, but the road there is less than smooth. Who wants to hear that whatever you were taught was wrong? Who wants to hear that? There's shock and denial. There's anger that comes from that. Depression and detachment. Once they realize that other people know and they can't use those tactics anymore around, they're depressed, detached. And then dialogue and bargaining, where we, in the restorative circles, we do, sometimes they're not all restorative in the sense of for a specific thing that happened, but more so we're just going to talk about life and how that goes. Well, this dialogue and bargaining is really where we want to get people to, and we want to get them in a crowd, in a group as well, talking about it, so that they can get a sense of what the rest of the community thinks about these issues that for the most part, people have just kept up inside their head for their whole entire life, and not realizing that these issues, they affect us all. We've all been told something that is wrong, either about somebody else, a group, whoever it is, and we had to struggle with that ourselves to come to a place of reconciling that. Dialogue and bargaining is the best place to do that. Group work, talking to other like-minded or people that are like-minded individuals that are gracious enough to help you get out of there, right? And that's community. That's where that help comes from. It isn't necessarily just a therapist, or, you know, those people are important, but the community, to hear from the community about how things are, and, you know, maybe some reflection on your own life is so valuable. Then last is the acceptance of it. You know, somebody that has used these things in their life so predominantly, I've seen where they flip to the other side and they accept it. They accept they can't use that anymore and they need to learn a new way. The acceptance piece right there is almost like being reborn for a lot of people, because they're learning how to be, and not just how to be. They want to be restorative. They want to be a good-minded person. This is what we're selling to them. This is what we're telling them is a goal. And then the return to meaningful life, and it could look totally different from your old life. You know, the old life, maybe you sat in bars and you complained all day about everybody, but this new life you can put into production. You can reconcile old relationships because you're in a new place now. And if I'm saying, you know, this new life coming, I'm saying sorry to somebody, they'll know what it's for at that point in time, right? The person delivering the apology, because they want you in their life and you're important to them. And they recognize that their past behavior has given you this message that they're not safe. And they're going to tell you they're sorry for that. And the biggest thing there is the change in behavior, because apologies are great. And we gain trust not from the apology, but from the changed behavior. Changed behavior over time is the definition of, I just lost my thought for a second. It's a definition of trust. That's how we trust. I've seen Hugh over a long period of time. He's consistent all the way through there. I've seen Garth and Ruth and Terry and Mona. They've all acted consistent. You trust them. You trust that when they're here together, we're going to act in a certain way and we're going to be good together. Everything's going to be fine. That is what trust is. But all of a sudden, if Hugh start acting all strange and whatnot, instead of casting him aside, we're going to go to him and ask him what happened, right? What's going on? What has he thought about since? We're going to get down to that place where something's happened. And there right there is we're going to help him come to his good mind. That's what these groups do when you get in them. You know, when you get your good mind and you start meeting a group of people that are of like mind, I really see this thing in there where those folks, including myself, don't want to lose any more people out of that circle, because it's comforting to know that people are of a good mind. You might not talk to them for a month or 2 or 6 months, but when you do, they'll have a good mind. And that's comfort. That's safety. And that's the return to meaningful life.
If you don't mind, Jim, I just want to ask you a question around the last graphic that we had. In terms of the path, I'm assuming that the timeline and the ways that people get to the final stage often will vary, correct?
It does vary. A rule of thumb that I've heard, and I would say is true, it's about 4 or 5 years for somebody to come from a place where they're in a traumatized state and acting a certain way. We brought them to attention, and then the work goes in, because the work is that's the hardest part, changing your own behavior, right? So in that, you need support. You have to cut out the people that aren't going to benefit you or are going to discourage you. So there's a lot going on in life fixing in those years, in that bottom rung. So from when people ask me and I tell them my own experience, it's about 4 or 5 years of, it's indifference, I'll say. You're indifferent to the old way of life, but you also don't know yet the whole new way of life. So what you know is you're not causing any more harm, right? But what you don't know is how to act. And that's something that you need to learn. And you learn that by getting involved in folks that are restorative. You get friends like Garth and Terry and Ruth, and that we keep each other in that good mind, and we set that as our goal, to be in a good mind. And it's your circles will grow and grow and grow. There was a point in time in my own life, I'll tell you, that I didn't have many people around me with a good mind. I didn't have many people I could talk to about this. But that grew and grew and grew, and I grew that. I found those people and they found me. So you look at life today opposed to 15 years ago, does it look completely different? Absolutely. If anybody said, how did you do it? Well, you had to cut out all the bad, you had to create new, and you had to live that. That's the answer to it. Is it possible? Absolutely. Absolutely is possible. When we look at the trouble that trauma can bring and the life that it can bring, it's every reason in the whole world to get on that path. And this is not just for, largely I speak to Indigenous people because I know we have a past that involves trauma, but the same past is involved with, I'm saying, everybody else has ever been colonized. Ask yourself a question about, if you were not Indigenous and you're from someplace else, what happened to your folks there, right? What happened when they got here too? Were they treated red carpet? Was everybody happy to see you? What are the traumas that all experienced? This is what we have to look at to understand what we need to heal from. And when we get in that place and it becomes common knowledge, and then we have a place to function, right? With the out loud outburst or the sadness, whatever it is, we can deal with it through that restorative practice.
Can I just add to that? So when we look at that spectrum that we had, punitive versus restorative, and there was harm and we just consequence, that person won't start this transformation. A restorative justice circle is going to start that transformation for a person to start to heal. It's easier for me to take the consequence and just come back and maintain what I was doing before. Ruth?
Yeah. So what this Johari window talks about is that there are parts of ourselves we're not aware of. And there are parts of ourselves that others are not aware of. And it's really important to be mindful of that. My public self, it's known to me and others. I've shared that I'm Jewish. I've shared that I'm white. Those are pieces you know about me. My private self may be something I haven't shared with you. It may be that there is something I'm struggling with. I may have an addiction. I may have an eating disorder. I may have family who I'm having a difficult time with. You don't know those things about me. Those are only known by me. And if I choose to tell you, I do. When we later talk about what's in our backpack, those are many of the things that we see that people do or do not disclose about themselves. And that adds more and more barriers. There's also a hidden self that others know about me, but I don't know. And I'll give an example. I just got hearing aids, which is super cool because I can hear. And what I didn't know is I used to talk really loudly. I didn't know that, but others did. And so people are now saying, oh my goodness, you're a soft talker. I had no idea I talk loud. That's just a really easy one to see. And then there's the other part, which there may be something going on that nobody knows. I don't know. It could be there's an illness. It could be a mental illness going on that's festering. But when you look at all of those, it's really important that we don't make assumptions, because things that are up there in our private self, people may make assumptions about them. You don't have to share it all, but people do make assumptions about things that you keep privately that they don't know about.
And so we walk around in all of the ones except for unknown in a restorative circle. All of this comes out, especially how people see you.
Absolutely. And that's really shocking for people sometimes. Someone put in the chat self-fulfilling prophecy. So for that one, you may have someone who repeats and repeats and ends up at court all the time. The system may have already given up on that person. The person doesn't know how predictable their behavior is, or that that is a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mm-hmm. What we do with our circles is we have to start meeting people where they're at. Because we see people's behavior, we don't know what's in their backpacks. We have to start talking about those things.
And if I could add a quick story to that one. So in the workplace, we may assume that everyone understands the rules, the code of conduct, everyone acts and comes from the same place. That isn't true. So we have to be really mindful, even within the workplace, that we're not expecting everyone will act the same, because there is not equality all the time.
And again, meeting people where they're at is, we got to start looking at our policies as well. For an example would be if there was a death, I think at my workplace, we're entitled to how many bereavement days, Ruth?
3, I believe, or 5 in some instances, or 1.
And
Depends
Jim,
on the relationship.
Jim, in your community, how long's a ceremony for a death?
We're looking at a week, right? The body usually comes back to the house, and every single night there's a wake. So there's singers that come in that sing, and somebody has to stay with the body 24 hours a day. So I remember when my brother passed away years ago. Someone has to be there with him all the time. So during the day, when say everybody, there's not everybody around all the time. For myself, I sat with my dead brother for days, right? And at the time you don't really understand why, I guess, but I look back onto it. It might have been the most healing time of my whole entire life. We're forced to have conversations, him and I. I was forced to just say the words. It was just him and I there. And when it all said and done, you felt a sense of that this is just the natural progression of going on, and you're passing them on and putting them in the ground, opposed to staying in that grief. I could still be telling that story, but if I'm telling that story right now, and a true telltale of unresolved grief would be if I was really crying and I could barely get these words out. Whereas right now I'm telling this story, it's just a story. It's just the story that went on. I'm grateful that I got to participate into it, but this is for other people that they maybe don't understand why they have to do that. It's very important.
So the reason I bring that up is so, Jim has a death in his family and somebody else has a death in their family, and Jim needs those 7 days. and we give them those 7 days, everybody's going to say that's fair. You're treating Jim different than me. And if we don't give Jim those days, we're traumatizing Jim and his family. So again, just meeting people where they're at. I love this one. That's the next one really, really speaks to me. Are we meeting people where we're at in school? Look at our curriculum. Look at our policies. Look at the amount of diversity within the board with teachers. It's very, very, very small. So we've got a lot of work to do.
I would say the same within the workforce. So we have standards and expectations of people to get the jobs. But the workforce, people who are trying to get in are very different and the skills are very different. And do we have hiring boards that are similar to that?
Well, it's a great example. So if I start a gang exit program tomorrow and there's a lot of Black and Indigenous youth and we all have all white staff, how's that going to work? So key objectives of restorative practice: to foster a good mind, promote and teach empathy, promote safer communities, reduce violent behavior, incidents, charges, reduce exclusion from our communities, increase linkages to supports to enhance at-risk and high-risk individuals. So thank you for having us today. This is normally 4 days, so we tried to give you as much as we could in this short period of time. Muna, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I just want to get back to a comment that was actually in our chat room around confirmation bias, and perhaps one of you can comment on that. So not being able to accept new information because it creates conflicting ideas in their minds. So essentially this difficulty for folks to essentially have these feelings, but knowing this new way of doing things and the difficulty that comes with the ways that things used to be done before and the new methods that are available now, how can we support people in doing that inner work, essentially?
I think what we find is hearing on how those beliefs impact other people. I'll give you an example. And that's what happens in a circle. You're going to have to sit there and listen to how that impacted me, my family, and you're going to have to active listen. And there's so much hatred in the world, and I said before that we assume people should know the difference between right and wrong. And if we just consequence them, they're never going to learn. So circles are more about teaching and learning from other people's experience on how your beliefs may impact them.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say to someone who has been harmed and who this idea of going through a restorative practice feels as though their pain and their trauma isn't really being addressed because there isn't that punitive consequential response to the offender, right? So almost as though you're providing an easy way out for the offender or the person who's causing this harm. How would you respond to it?
So I'll jump in quick, then you can go, Jim. Saw your hand too. Anyone who's been through a circle will tell you it's way more work. So it is much easier, and it is a much easier process to not have to bear witness to the pain, to not have to listen to what everyone has had to say. And these circles can take somewhere from 5-10 hours, depends on the situation, but it is much more difficult and much more digging deep, as if it's layers of an onion being peeled off. to really get to the root cause of what's going on.
Jim, I'm just going to ask you to be conscious of the time. I believe we only have 8 minutes left, correct?
Okay, yeah. So I guess really, it's a convincing sometimes at that point in time, the harm just coming to a circle to listen to who harmed them. And, when we talk to folks about that, we really do emphasize the idea that if you have an opportunity to release this from your life, right, your life will be that much better. Them sitting in jail isn't going to make your life better, right? But sitting in front of somebody saying, wow, I really understand how I impacted you. I'm really sorry. And that will never happen again. This is the work I'm going to do. That will absolutely set you free. It'll give you some confidence in society, in our fellow man, that change is possible. And we see it. It's not like we don't see it. We see it a lot. We've seen, the rich and powerful come to circles that are in a lot of trouble, right? But, they've opted for mediation, a restorative approach. And, one time, just quickly, I had a principal who was about 55 years old. For all purposes, he got in a fight with a 12-year-old girl. He ended up taking a book off her, hitting her in the nose. But as it all trickled down, we had to get to a place where he understood that it was him that did not have control over his emotions. We only expect so much out of the 12-year-old girl, right? But we expect a lot out of him. And, that may never, and to that little girl, the young lady, that was the world to her, to see that man even humbled to the place. Because this is what we're in there. We're talking truth to power a lot of times, right? And power doesn't necessarily like that. It irritates its ears. And we don't care, but we still speak it because it's important. Because otherwise, a 12-year-old girl is going to go around thinking it's okay for a man to put his hands on her and make her do what he wants. And we simply, that was the crux of the problem right there.
Jim, I'm just going to jump in because I know we got a few more questions, but I'll just ask you one last question. Will that principal ever do that again?
Mm-mm. He will not ever do that again, ever. He just
Luna,
won't.
do you have another question for us?
Yeah, I do actually. And this is in regards to those that may not be old enough to see the benefits of this way of addressing conflict, right? So in the context, for instance, for young people in schools, is there an opportunity, do you think that, school boards can maybe look at a restorative practice as a tool to address conflict? We know that for racialized Black youth, there is a real concern around, the numbers of expulsions and the numbers of suspensions as a response to conflict or behaviors. When this tool of restorative practice is utilized, do you think that there is a venue for institutions like our educational institutions to really look into ways that they can incorporate restorative practice when dealing with conflict?
That real quick for you? So about 12 years ago, there was a partnership with the Hamilton Police Department, both school boards and John Howard, and we had funding for restorative justice. We trained every single school in the city. Terry was a police officer who was using it. And then the funding ran out. So I'll give you an example. As I incorporated into Sir John A. Macdonald at the time, that was the most at-risk school there. Most Indigenous people, most people of color lived in conflict, most suspensions, most expulsions in the city. Within 3 years of implementation of restorative practice, we had 0 expulsion. 0. But here's the problem with this. You need a neutral person to facilitate these circles. You need people that come in are not biased. You got people that come in who aren't afraid of a superintendent, who aren't afraid of a principal, who aren't afraid of a director of education. Because we have to crush that. And it's the same thing in the police department. It's exactly the same thing. That's why John Howard are the people who have been facilitating this. In order to get there, people need to get more training, and they have to learn what restorative practice is. They need to learn a new language, and for adults, they have to unlearn. And we are still doing it in some schools, Muna, but it's for a fee, right?
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to ask a couple quick questions. There's a question around essentially restorative circles seem like it can take a while for real change. Moreover, there may not be enough resources for it, or the lack of training, if you will. In your viewpoints, how can it benefit communities who live off of fast punitive actions?
Ruth, you want to get that one?
Yeah, one of the pieces, it is also used in people's homes. So it isn't just in an institution, but really the crux of it is being non-judgmental and starting by asking what happened. What happened? And really trying to figure out what do we need to do to hear your story and to be able to move forward. So those concepts, whereas they do take a lot of time, it becomes a way of life. Jim said it at one point. Garth and Terry have always said it. Being restorative is a way of life. It's a way you approach the world.
And it does take twice as long. However, it saves time in the end, because when we've done circles, those people don't do the same thing again.
Yeah. Okay, one last question, if you guys have a moment, please. What do you do in the event that the other person does not want to acknowledge the harm that they have caused?
Then we're pushed to find supports for the person that was harmed. That doesn't mean that we can't do a circle, because we still have to help them heal. The other person, unfortunately, we're going to have to go back to punitive measures. So this is an alternative to punitive.
Yeah.
The other aspect of that is this, that, you know, if it's, say, Garth that's not owning it at all, and Ruth is the one that something's happened to, we'll still run a circle, say, with Ruth. And really what we're going to do with Ruth, talk to her at that point in time, is the things we know about Garth, right? How, and really what we're doing at a point in time is we're building into Ruth some knowledge that will keep her safe. Do you know what I mean? So for instance, you know, we see sometimes with, you know, somebody is not a bully, but, you know, they're the aggressor, and they start acting a certain way. Well, we'll talk to her about, listen, watch when he starts acting like this, and just really get yourself out of there or report it to somebody. Whereas before, these things were happening to her and she didn't know why, and she wasn't aware of how it was all even transpiring. So we're really building capacity into her. So is it, you know, let's put it this way. We see all the time where an individual is doing something to somebody else. When us four come, they don't do that in front of us, right? And really what we're showing people is like, listen, they're really quite cowardice, right? Listen, I know lots of people that are you know, complete assholes, just for lack of better words. They're that way everywhere, right? I'm saying. Whereas some people just do it in front of the weak ones, right? You know, what we kind of remedy them, and there is so much in behind it too, where when we show up and people know that's what we're looking for, often we are the remedy, right? We you know, people will say, do you want me to call Garth back in here? And they'll go, no, they'll straighten out. If that's the way it's got to be, we're not coming to beat you up. You know, you'd probably rather that. We're coming to talk to you about your behavior, right? You know, so people, it's a learning thing for people too. It's a consequence. Again, they'd rather the fight, but if you're coming to talk to them, that's horrible in their world.
And Mona, just to piggyback
Wonderful.
on that, this is the importance of the pre-work for a circle. You have to do the pre-work. A lot of people are just getting people together and having these conversations and creating more harm.
Right. Thank you so much. So folks, we are coming up to the 5:30 mark. This has been a wonderful learning experience. Thank you very much, Garth, Jim, and Ruth, for being with us and sharing your insights and experience. There's so much more to talk about. I know we still haven't gotten to all the questions, but we are committed to keeping this conversation going in future sessions, and certainly in our spring event on May 19th and 20th. Our next session in this series is on March 3rd, 2021 at 4:15 p.m. The focus is on community response to hate, an approach to collectively combating hate in our communities. Thank you so much for participating from home. We hope you will join us in March. Have a wonderful evening. Merci beaucoup et passez une bonne soirée.